that actually helped. So today we're going to be talking, and so I do usually work with the youth. So I don't know what it is. The youth are awesome. You older people freak me out. So I don't know what it is. Something about you guys, the way you look, I don't know. But today, the thing I want to ask you guys about, or the thing I want to bring up way back in your head, or maybe you have one now, I don't know. But how many guys have a secret handshake right now? You can think, I got a secret handshake. Anybody that can do the secret handshake with somebody in here right now? Anybody? Oh, you guys got one? Oh, I totally don't. So I won't call anybody out except for my wife, because she does have a secret handshake, and it's not with me, so I have issues with that, because I'm supposed to have a secret handshake. So my wife has a secret handshake, and it's with actually her aunt, Brittany, okay? So they're growing up, even though it's her aunt, they're like
a year apart.
A year apart.
A year, 4 months, and a day.
All right, year, 4 months, and a day. So anyway, so they really are really close, and so they had this secret handshake growing up, right? And so Jordan, it wasn't her handshake, but I'm sure she was like, "Please let me go in," and they're probably like, "Oh, we can teach you too." So anyway, come do your all secret handshake. Come on now.
So the first thing she actually was like, "Am I able to do it like Jordan because she's not Brittany?" For the record, they taught it to me when I was a kid, so I was cool enough to like know it, but I didn't do this regularly, so I might mess it up.
And I even asked Brittany first. I was like, "Can you please come to church and do this handshake with me?" Yeah. And she's out of town. I said, "Can Jordan? Is it okay? Do I have permission to do this handshake with Jordan?" She said, "Just this one time."
That's not that good.
Okay, here it goes.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, everybody give them a hand applause. All right. So the funny thing is, in all honesty, growing up, we had secret handshakes, right? And there's this group called 21 Pilots. I know Junior's son actually loves this group. He's not here today, but I'd point him out and embarrass him. But Drew loves 21 Pilots. But they actually have a secret handshake, and they let fans come up on stage, and they do it with them, right? And so today, and let me just, we'll go back to this, but I'm just going to mention this. So today we're actually talking about like a secret handshake, if you will, or how many, secret fort. If you didn't have a secret handshake, you better have a secret fort. Boys, I know for sure, in the woods, if somebody went to your fort and they weren't invited to your fort, you threw rocks at them, you stabbed them, you did whatever it took to get them out of your fort, right? And in all honesty, most of the time they were terrible. Like, you would walk by and you'd be like, I didn't even know that was a fort. That's a terrible fort. You'd be like, no, that's my fort, right? So you took pride in it. But if you haven't had a secret handshake, secret fort, or maybe you're digging through the cobwebs and think about it, that's all right. That's cool. We'll talk about it, but we'll go back to that. But today, what we're talking about, and in order to get to that point, I have a few things to say about it. We're talking about communion, right? And the reason I do that correlation is because really communion, right, is a secret handshake of the church, right? Think about it. If you don't go to church, communion is a foreign concept to you. A little tiny cracker, a piece of bread, right? And it's stale, and usually they're not that good. Let's be honest, right? We could come up with better bread. But the idea is, you'd think after 2,000 years we'd have something better than that kind of cracker. You know what I'm saying? An oyster cracker tastes better than that. But in all honesty, you got this little cracker, you got this juice, right? And I'm joking, but it's something sacred when you're somebody who has been part of the church, right? But if you're somebody is outside of church family, you come in, you're kind of like, whoa, what is this? And to be honest, if you've come to church at all in your life, right, you have probably either been to a church or experienced where they have communion, or you've taken communion yourself, and maybe for your whole life you're like, this secret handshake I do, but really doesn't make any sense to me. So today we're going to be breaking it down. We're going to be talking about it. And in order to do that, and in order for me to kind of, for some of you parents out here, or people who've known me over in the youth but don't know me personally, I'm going to talk about my family, right? Because I love my family. They're awesome. This is me and my wife. This is an engagement picture. Actually, somebody in the crowd took the picture. I'm not going to name anybody, but so that's, see how she's looking at me? She loves me. And then this picture over here, see how pretty she is? Most beautiful wife in the world. So just, that's my wife, right? And so here's my kids. So I'm going to just say this, right? And maybe you guys agree, but I have these pictures that I'm showing, and you're probably thinking, oh, look at how cute those babies are. Or maybe you're not. If you're not, then something's wrong with you. Because they're cutest in the world. But there's something different for those pictures for me, right? Because I was present when they were born. right? And the same is true for you and your families, right? You have kids, you have family members, you have people that you love, people that you've been around your whole life. And pictures, when you're looking at somebody else's pictures, you're like, okay, it's not. Anybody have like 6 million pictures from their wedding? And they sit there and they look at all their pictures and they're like, oh, they're the one. And if you're looking at 6 million, you're like, all right, this is you're getting a little carried away. Right? But there is something to be said about your pictures and your wedding, right? Because it's something special, something intimate to you. And that's true for me and my kids. So I love my kids. And some of you out there might love my kids too, and some of you guys I know well, so these pictures might mean a little bit more to you. But they still are a little more special to me because they're my kids and I witnessed everything. So here's my kids being born. There's my daughter kissing my son when he was born. She also will always hold these memories, right? There's something special. There's bonds that are made. And so today we're talking about, some more. I'm going to show them off. So they love each other and hate each other at the same time. If I have it, your kids or your siblings, yeah, hate and love all together. All right, so this is what I'm getting to. So when you have this connection, right? What makes a relationship so special? Right? What makes a relationship so special? And that's kind of the idea that I'm talking about today. When we're talking about communion, you have to talk about relationships. Right? Because the idea of communion, the very first communion, was just that. It was Jesus with his 12 disciples, right? It was the 12 people he was closest with. It wasn't with some random people. It was with the 12 closest people to him. And so when we get to that point, we see that communion is all about relationships, right? And I would argue that what makes a relationship so special, what makes a relationship so intimate, is time spent together. And not just time, quality time spent together, right? The more positive quality memories that you have with the person, the more intimate a relationship becomes, right? So my kids, I got to watch them be born, and I watched them until they're grown up. And so that relationship naturally has a special bond, right? And all of you guys have that in your life at somewhere, either a brother, a sister, mother, father. If you're missing one or the other, you have that piece somewhere in your life. Would everybody agree with that? So, but there's something about pictures that you don't get the whole picture, right? When you just see a picture, you just see the picture. You don't get the whole picture, you only get a piece of it. But there's something that happens when I told you the special bond I have with my kids, that picture changes me, right? Because the kids have changed my picture. They've changed my life. Like now, I got to change their diapers. Now, I got to wake up with them and feed them and do all these things, and we have this intimate relationship. So when somebody snaps a picture of us, they've changed my picture. And when you think about your life and you think about your family, you have the same concept that goes on. It's true for you as well. And it's because of quality time and because of memories that you have and build that relationship is strengthened and it grows, and that's how you get to the point you're at with the people you love. And so, but there's something missing if you're not intimately involved in the picture. Does that make sense? There's something missing. Let me show you. You see these pictures, these three right here specifically. Something missing. You might be able to grasp the one on the right because I don't know if you can tell that's a gravestone. Okay, so you might be able to figure that out, but that's my daughter at a gravestone. But you don't know whose grave that is. And maybe if you know me well enough, you do. You see the last name Frazier, and if you know me and you know my life, you know my story, you know that that's my mom's gravestone. Right? And if you know me, I have my dad who passed away, I have a sister who passed away. So as a young guy, I've kind of been through some storms. Right? And so as I'm going through this, I'm thinking, you know what's crazy? Is if people look at this headstone, they see my daughter and they see me, but they don't know who that is. Or maybe they do. Right? So they don't get the whole picture. You just get a piece of it. And even if you think you got the whole picture, you weren't there at that moment with me because that's on Mother's Day and that's tough. So you still don't have the whole picture. Even if you know my whole story, you still don't have the whole picture. Because when I'm kneeling there, what I'm thinking in my head that's going through I have memories, lots of them. And when I'm reminiscing and remembering over, you don't have all those. And same goes for me with your pictures and your family and things of that nature. And so there is a piece that you can get, a kind of a piece of it, but you don't get the whole thing. And so this picture on the left, daddy kissing daughter, sweet picture. Well, I actually had pleurisy in this picture, and it was awful. I was in extreme pain, and those are my daughter's second year. It was her second birthday, and we were getting like 2-year-old pictures. And it's sweet, but I'm in extreme pain, and she's kissing daddy, not just as she loves me, but she was kissing me like, oh, daddy's not feeling good. Right? But you don't get that if you just look at the picture. You weren't there, you don't fully get it. And so the same is true up top. So some of you guys know the story of her. And some of you guys have intimate memories and knowledge of her even more than I do. But Vicki here, Vicki Meredith, and Steve Meredith here with us today, she was sick as could be in that picture. Right? And it's a nice family photo. You're like, oh, sweet, that's a sweet family photo. If you were just looking at it from the outside, you wouldn't get the whole thing. You would just see, So when we're talking about communion, we have to go back to relationships because it's the foundation of it. So Jesus' relationship with his disciples, right? I told you a second ago that he shared it with his 12 closest friends. And so the Bible gives us the intimate stories and details, but there's a lot left out. Would you guys agree with that? There are some pertinent details I'm sure that they don't mention because that book would be miles long. And the same is true for you and your family. The relationships you have, if you were to write a book about it, it'd be condensed and it would just be the highlights, but still the whole picture's missing. And so here's the thing. He shared this communion with his 12 closest friends, right? And we know this because in Matthew 26:18 he says, he replied, go into the city to a certain man and tell them, the teacher says, the teacher, him being himself, says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house. We have it. It's in writing. His disciples, the 12 of them. Only the 12. Right? And so just like you had a secret fort when you were growing up, he took his friends to his secret fort. We're going to the upper room, just us. We're going to have this intimate meal. And so they go there. And Jesus even referred to the disciples as his brothers at one point. Okay? In Matthew 12, 48 and 49, he replied to him. Okay, so he was talking. He said, he replied to him, who is my brother and who is my mother and who are my brothers? Pointing to his disciples, he said, here are my mother and brothers. So he was so tight with them, he's like, that's my brother. How many of you guys have a relationship with somebody that you love? You just be like, that's my brother. Maybe not same birth mom, but you're like, that's my brother from another mother. Yeah, got that? Good. All right. So the 12 disciples also had a close bond with Jesus, right? You would see that they would say the same thing about Jesus. Jesus had a close bond with them. They had a close bond with Jesus. And here's the thing that happens with them, right? They watched Jesus perform miracle after miracle. I would give you the scriptures for that, but it'd take a long time. Look at the Gospels. They're filled with them. He did miracles after miracles. Again, the highlights. So, of course, they put those in there because it was important. So you find that in all the Gospel accounts. You'll also find it in Acts and other parts of the Bible that they continued to do miracles after Jesus left. All right, so they witnessed his life in almost every aspect, right? The people that you are closest with, I would assume, and I could guess probably that you have done the same thing. You have spent intimate time with the people in your life. And so in every aspect of life, you've seen them. You've seen them sleep, you've seen them eat, you've seen them do those things. Well, the same is true for the disciples, right? They saw him eating. And again, you can refer back to your sheet. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's specifics, but it shows in the gospel accounts on these verses that are up here, they were eating with him in Matthew 14:20. He was sleeping in Mark 4:37. They were with him in crowds in Mark 5:21 and numerous other times. These are just one example. I'm just checking off a list for you. They were by themselves, just the disciples and Jesus, when they had the first communion. That was an example of it. But they also were sometimes individually with him to pray, right? There's accounts where it was just Peter, John. There was times where it was Peter, John, and James only. All right. Next, they listened to his parables. So how many of you guys have somebody older in your life that you love, that you listen to their stories? I think that's a piece of life that some people miss out on. right? We need to make sure we do that. But listening to people's stories is so important to getting to know who they are, right? And so they listened to his parables, and they tried to model their life after his. In Mark 4, 34, I'm going to read it. It says, with many similar parables, Jesus spoke the word to them, as much as they could understand. He did not say anything to them, and he's referring to the crowds, without using a parable. But when he was alone with his own disciples, he explained everything. You know, some people don't get the intimate details, right? Some people might know you from an outside view, but they don't get the intimate details of the things that you go through, right? You don't tell everybody your personal life. That's reserved for the people that you're closest with. All right, and so there were many times, even when they didn't understand what he was saying or what he was doing. How many guys got some people that don't make any sense in your life? Okay. Sometimes you're like, what are you doing? I do not understand. Well, you're not alone. The disciples at times looked at Jesus and literally are like, what's he talking about? They were confused by Jesus. And I'll give an example of this too, because this one cracks me up. If you guys are familiar with the story, but in Matthew 16:7, verse 9, this is the disciples talking amongst themselves. They said, they discussed among themselves and said, it is because we didn't bring any bread. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you of little faith, why are you talking amongst yourself about having no bread? Do you still not understand? He had just fed 5,000 people, right? You guys know the story. And then he goes on and feeds 4,000 people with basically no bread. And they're thinking that he's upset about them bringing no bread. He's like, don't you guys get it? I can make bread out of nothing. But they didn't get it. They still were confused. They were confused by Jesus at times. And there was times when they outright disagreed with Jesus, right? There's times when Jesus did things and they didn't understand. So in Matthew 26, 8 through 12, they didn't fully get the whole picture yet, but Jesus was about to go to the cross. And they didn't understand this. And in this verse it says, when the disciples saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste? They asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Right? They're talking about this woman who comes in and basically breaks an expensive jar of perfume. Like one that could have been used for a full year's wages. We're talking expensive. How many guys got a bottle of perfume that's worth your whole year's worth of wages? Anybody got one? I promise you, you're not going to break it on somebody's head, right? You're going to use a different type of bottle. And so the thing is this is what this woman does. And so they're confused, like, what a waste. Right? And Jesus says, aware of this, he says to them, why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me with you. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. And they're like, what? Again, confused. They're not getting the whole picture. Right? Jesus did things in an unconventional manner. So when we're talking about this, you see that there's a relationship between Jesus and his disciples that's very, very intimate. And it's the same thing that you have with your family, right? As you grow, as you watch them sleep, as you watch them eat, as you spend time with them, as you hear stories, as you talk to them, then you get these details of life. And so you get the details, but often we miss the big picture. And so in Matthew 16:23, the verse says, Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan, you are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. How many of you guys have ever been in a fight or had some disagreement with somebody that you love? Right? That's part of the relationship, and that's natural. It comes with relationships. And there were times where they just didn't get Jesus, and there was times where Jesus just straight up disagreed with them and rebuked them for it. Now, going back to this idea of communion, then we have to get to this point of understanding that communion, what it is, in essence, the whole source of communion is based on the idea of relationships. And I would argue that with anybody, in order to fully understand communion, you have to understand that relationship is at its core. And so the Greek word for communion is actually the same word used for fellowship. And some of you guys know this, but the Greek word is koinonia. and it means fellowship. It means the close association between persons, emphasizing what is common between them. Now, there's something that I do, and maybe I'm weird for it, but I'm going to assume that I'm not alone in this. But there's times where sometimes I just get nostalgic. Anybody do that? You get nostalgic and you just look back at pictures and videos of your family. Right? And there's times where it doesn't make any sense why I do it, but sometimes I'll be on my laptop and I will just start looking at hundreds of pictures and videos. And I will look back at my kids, and I'll look back at pictures of my wife. I'll look back at pictures of my mom and my dad. And I just get nostalgic, and I'm just thinking about those memories that we had together, right? And when I do that, something happens, right? The memories that we have with the people that we love, right? There's a positive quality time spent there. Something happens when we reminisce, right? When we remember and we focus, we get moved by that relationship that we shared. And so these disciples, they're going through their life, right? And you get the idea. Let's go back to them. They're at this place. They're in an upper room with their best friend, and he basically tells them, hey, this is the last time I'm ever going to have a meal with anyone. And they're like, what? They're kind of in denial. They're thinking, no, what do you mean? This is the last time you're going to have a meal with anyone? And he's like, yeah, this is my body, and it's going to be broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And they're kind of thinking, what are you talking about? Right? But Jesus knew about this idea of reminiscing and sitting down and relishing in and focusing on the relationship. Right? He understood what was about to happen. Right? The time in life that we do this most often is something we're going to talk about in just a minute. But there's a time in life where we do this reminiscing thing a lot. And so they look at and they get to this place where they're like, okay, whatever. Well, sure enough, what happens? Judas betrays him, right? They take up Jesus. And what do they do to him? They beat him, right? They flog him. They torture him. They whip him. They mock him. They spit on him, right? And as his 12 friends, they just have to sit and watch it. And there's nothing they can do about it. And so they watch it. And some of the closest, like Peter, arguably the closest, denies him 3 times. And so they get to this place in their relationship where you can imagine all the memories had to have been flooding back, right? Because they're thinking, well, what do you mean? How can this be happening to him? Right? Because of who he was, they were challenged. They were taken back by what is going on. Right? They had to have been confused. Right? And I'm sure they had a ton of fear. Right? But how could he be dying? What are you talking about? Right? And some feelings of deceit and wasted time. I'm sure there were feelings that this guy was supposed to be God. Like, what is going on? And I imagine them trying to remember all that Jesus was, all that he embodied, everything that he was, and they were trying to put it all back together, right? Everything was falling apart, and they were trying to just pick up the pieces, all the memories, all the parables, try to collect it in their mind and say, what's going on here? Because they didn't have the whole picture. They were confused by the picture going on. And isn't that true for us as well? Like, how many of you guys have been in a place where this is true for you? Like I said, I'm going to go back to this, but there's one time that we really do sit back and remember and reminisce and focus and relish on people's memories. You know when it is? Funerals. Something at a funeral is when that's the time you guys sit and you wake up and you don't fall asleep. I've never seen, and maybe it's happened, but I've never seen somebody go to a funeral and be like, it happens all the time when we get up here and talk about Jesus or we talk about somebody, but at funerals, everybody's wide awake. Except for the person at the funeral, right? And so what happens is we do this. And what it does is we realize at a funeral, that person is gone. And what we realize is that time is short. and limited, right? And these memories, they start flooding back, just like it did for the disciples as they were watching him, right? Because without the reflection, life is different. And so with my pictures of my kids, what I do is sometimes I sit and it changes what's going on. I could have had the worst day. I could have had a day where I just was ready to give up. And then I look at the cute pictures of when they were born and the moments that they're so sweet and the videos that I have of them. And man, it sets you back. It makes you different. See, remembering and reminiscing about memories is doing just that. It's doing just what the disciples did. And so when I get to this point, we have to sit and ask this question, right? And this is the pivotal question of the sermon, and this is the pivotal question of this service, is just this. Is I told you that my kids have changed my life. They have changed my picture. And we see in the disciples' lives that Jesus changed their picture. But the question is, and before we can even partake in communion or this secret handshake of Christianity or what have you, you have to ask the question, and I have to ask the question of myself, is, has Jesus changed your picture? Right? Are there times that it's clear as day to you? Are there times that you can say, I know for a fact that my picture was different prior to now, and it was Jesus that changed it? And so the question becomes, has he changed your picture, or is he in the process of changing your picture? You see, when I went through those things about Jesus, Jesus had this amazing way of changing everyone's picture. Everyone's picture he came in contact with, he changed it. Some for the better and some for the worse. If you were a Pharisee, the way he changed your picture, he turned you into wanting to kill him. And Jesus still, to this day, has that effect. Right? He had that effect 2,000 years ago, and still to this day, he has that effect. But Jesus will change your picture. It just depends which way you see it. And so the question becomes, has he changed your picture yet? Let me give you an example. The disciples, they're on the boat. They're freaking out. There's a storm going on. The verse I used was him sleeping. That was the common thing that you do with people that you love. Jesus is just sleeping. What does he do? He wakes up and calms the storm. Changes the picture. The hungry crowds of people. You got all these people. You only got a few fish, a few loaves. What are we going to do? We got to feed 5,000. And they say in the Bible it actually says 5,000 men. That doesn't count the women and children. It was probably closer to 8,000 or 10,000 people. And I got a few loaves to do it. What are we going to do? Jesus changes the picture. I got it. See, Jesus always had a way of changing the picture. Those who were sick, lame, deaf, and blind, Jesus changed their picture in a dramatic way. They didn't leave the same way as when they first met him. Sorry. Those burdened with sin, the outcast, people held captive by demons in their lives, literally the man that was shackled. On all those verses on the paper that I have sitting in the seats, you can go back and look to them. Right? In Mark 5:21, I used it for the big crowds. Well, Jesus healed a man possessed by legion, shackled, right? And then heals a sick woman that surrounded him, just touched his cloak. In one of the other verses, he put the soldier's ear back on right after, when they witnessed him praying, right? Just a normal thing of life, just intimate moment. After he was praying, Peter chopped his ear off. He put his ear back on. Another moment, the disciples are praying with Jesus, and Moses and Elijah appear. Right? And then after that, Jesus heals a demon-possessed boy. So in all these verses surrounding them, whether they were confused, whether he was doing something, in every single one of those ordinary life circumstances, Jesus came in and he changed their picture in a dramatic fashion. I don't know about you guys, but I've never walked down the street and changed everyone's picture that I come in contact with. Jesus had this effect. Now, I'm going to get to this because this is something that's important. So, my kids, right? They're awesome. You guys can clap. Come on. Somebody clap. Wave your way out. My kids are awesome. And so, Jesus has this way of changing pictures. And there's something that goes on, right? When I was younger, this concept was hard for me to understand. And maybe that's where you're at today. Maybe this idea of like, well, Jesus hasn't really changed my picture. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm not really at that place. And that's okay. That's cool. When I was younger, this concept was hard for me to understand. So hopefully if you're at this place, hopefully this example that I'm about to go to will hopefully give you at least a different outlook. Right? The conclusion I've come to is the relationship that I have with my family, right, is that we spend quality time together. Right? I spend quality time with my kids. But more so than that, I don't have to work. I don't have to work to love them. I don't. Most of you guys would see that. It's the closest thing to unconditional relationship. And I would say brothers and sisters, same thing, mom and dad. It just comes natural. You don't work to love them, but you have to work on the relationship side. You don't have to work for the love, you have to work for the relationship. And so I found that is true with my kids, but I'm intentional about it. Right? I'm intentional about spending time with them. Right? And I have to work to make sure that our relationship stays strong by spending time with them. And to be honest, as a dad, and you guys will know this to be true for your life as well, you have to step out of your world and enter theirs. Little 3-year-old kid, I got to become a princess. My 3-year-old daughter, I have to be princess. All right? Or prince. And for my son, I got to get down and we're playing with dirt. I'm not eating it with him. That's on him. But I got to be able to play in the dirt with him, right? And with my wife, I have to be willing to go see the greatest something. There you go. Right? And so with your spouse, no, it's a good show. So, but the truth is no matter what, I don't have to work for the love, right? I love them as unconditionally as a human possibly could, but I have to work at the relationship. I have to come down and be in their life. And I feel like this is what God was showing me about him, about God's relationship with us, right? God doesn't have to work to love us. Right? It's similar to the way that your relationships are with those that you love. But he worked and continues to work to have a relationship with us. And he did a huge majority of the work through Jesus. Right? And Jesus did the same thing that a loving father or a husband would do, and he was willing to step out of his world to enter ours. See, he did the exact same thing that I have to do with my kids. Right? And what this does is this makes him relatable, and it makes him approachable and accessible. Hebrews 4:15 says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin." Right? And so, in order for us to know how far his love will go, he willingly laid down his life for us, just like a good father would do for his kids. I would take a bullet in a heartbeat without even thinking for my wife or kids. One of you guys might hesitate. But for my wife or my kids, none. No hesitation. See, he loves us unconditionally the same way that we do for our kids as well. Even with all our flaws, he loves us just the way we are. And so I work on my relationship, right, with my family. And sometimes they are difficult. That's the kids, not my wife. But sometimes they're difficult. And sometimes they don't listen, and that's my wife. Yeah, not the kids. Anyhow, I know and I won't say that our relationship is terrible when that happens, right? When they don't listen or when they're difficult, but it definitely makes things complicated. Won't you agree? Yeah? I mean, sometimes I'm like, Caden, if you grab the pill bottle one more time, I'm not kidding either. He overdosed on ibuprofen not that long ago. I'm not joking. He got the lid, childproof lid off and drank it. Yep, that's my child for you. So, yeah, he's good. He's not dead. But I'm telling you, at moments when he's still, you'd think after you drank a whole bottle of Tylenol and felt bad, you wouldn't want to do it again. But if he sees a bottle of Tylenol, he's like, ah. So, be praying for my kid. Apparently, ibuprofen is an issue now. Hopefully, it doesn't turn into something later. We can keep this on recording for years down the road. Pray for him. But anyway, I work on this relationship, right? And sometimes I mess up, and I have to apologize. My son still doesn't talk very much, so I don't have to apologize to him yet, thank God. But I do apologize to my 3-year-old, right? And that's a humbling thing, apologizing to a 3-year-old. But I do it. And why? Right? Because that relationship is important to me. And I want you guys to think about this. This is what it showed me about our relationship with God. Right? And the kids can say the same thing. In order to have a good relationship with their parents, they got to listen. And sometimes they have to say, I'm sorry. Right? It goes both ways. And I would say that that's true for us. Right? For us to have a strong relationship with Him. Right? We have to focus on that relationship with Him. But the way that He loves us, it helps us focus on it more. And this is what I mean by it. If you know your dad loves you unconditionally, kids, or if you, any relationship you can put in there, you're going to be more likely to go and apologize to your dad because you know he's a good man and you love him and you want to have a good relationship with him. Or your mom. Or anybody that's important to you. And so it makes you focus on a relationship, and so you'd be willing to look past the small things. Right? It allows us to look past the small things. It allows us to be like, hey, you know what? I get it. Like sometimes we're human, we mess up. Just get it. But with God, it's a little different. Anyway, it allows us and teaches us to admit when we're wrong and to correct those things. And then it teaches us to cherish the time we are given. Like I said with the example of the funeral, we only have a limited amount of time. And so something happens when we sit back and we remember and we reminisce about somebody. It makes us realize, like, ooh, time is short. Let's not get caught up and tripped up by all the silly little things. Let's not let this relationship be broken for something silly. And then through the other 4 things, right, it pushes us to be a better follower and believer of Jesus, or at least question that relationship. Just like a funeral, sometimes that's the time where you question life the most. When we really sit back and think about the relationship with Jesus, then it changes what we think about our life. So one common thing happens. Something special happens in every relationship when we take the time to just sit back, sit down, reminisce, and meditate on that relationship. Right? Remembering the important stuff really has a way of keeping our hearts and our love focused on that relationship. Right? And it allows us to look past all the small things, and it teaches us to change the things you're doing wrong and pushes you to be a better person, a better parent, a better kid. So today, the goal is, and I hope you've tracked with me this whole time, but the goal is, and this is what we want to do, is sit back, remember, and reminisce, and think about all the good things that God has done for us. Right? When we're talking about communion, that's really what we're talking about. And here's the thing. Some of us have never even taken the time to do this. Not just with relationships in our life, but with a relationship with God. We just don't think of the small things on a regular basis, and we don't think of them as a blessing from God. And so this big thing, this idea of Jesus dying for us, it's hard to even fathom. If you can't even look at the small things and you don't reminisce on those, how can you think of the greatest, biggest type of idea out there? Right? And so this idea of God being a personal or loving God is tough, right? And so today, if that's where you're at, I'm just going to challenge you to look at all the small and good and amazing things you have in this life as free and merciful gifts from God. Use that as your starting place. Maybe you haven't done that. So in my life, I can point to specific times where I knew that the picture was changing. I showed you a picture up there of my mom, but when my mom died or when my dad died, there were times where my picture was changing, and I felt like no one else knew what was going on or understood what was going on. But there was one and only one person that I felt knew and was chasing me down in those moments. Do you have that today? Do you know specific times in your life when Jesus was chasing you down and trying to change your picture? Because here's the thing, if you know Jesus, then he's changing your picture. I've already established that with the disciples in his whole life. Everyone he came in contact with, he was changing their picture. So do you have that today with your family? Here. Do you have that with God? See, my kids throw tantrums sometimes. How many of you guys have kids that throw tantrums? How many of you guys, they live through it? I was one that threw tantrums when I was little, I guess. I don't remember it. There's a reason for that. But you know what's funny is during those times, it's really, really hard for me to remember all the good and awesome qualities of my kids when they're throwing a tantrum. Amen? Amen. There is something that's difficult when they're being deliberately disobedient. And the same thing goes for my wife. Sometimes it's tough. She's not obeying. But that's why remembering and reminiscing is so important, right? And I would be willing to say that when my kids are throwing their tantrums, or when my wife is, about not getting her throw pillows that she wants on the couch, and when Caden doesn't get the next car that he wants, or Emerson is thrown because I didn't put the right princess dress on her, when she's throwing those tantrums, you know what she's not, Emerson and Caden and my wife, what they're not thinking about? Right? They're not thinking about all those small little things that they have. They're not thinking about the beating heart that they have in their chest. They're not thinking about the next breath that they get to take. They're not thinking about all their senses that they can see and hear and feel and touch. They're not thinking about the fact that they have a roof over their head. They're not thinking about the fact that I prepare meals for them, mainly my kids, but sometimes for my wife. They're not thinking about the fact that they have water and electricity and protection in this country, and by me and by God, they don't think about that. So that's what communion's about. It's about stopping and thinking about just those little things. Right? And if we would do that in the middle of a tantrum, if my kids did that, then their tantrum would be pretty insignificant. So I don't know where you're at today. I don't know what picture you got in your mind. I don't know what is going on in your life. And if you can't think of anything to be thankful for, whether you've accepted this truth or not, this is the one that communion is really all about, right? That God loved you so much, that he was willing to sacrifice himself in the form of a son to have a relationship with you. And see, and this is where I got to pause. I love everyone in this room. I really do. There's no way in this world to have a relationship with you I'd sacrifice my kid. No way. And if you just think about the fact that he did exactly that, what a reckless love we have in the God that we serve. That Jesus was going to the cross knowing what he was doing. See, communion's meant to sustain us. We do it week in and week out because it is meant to give us a focus on these things. See, and here's the difference with communion, and this is the craziest thing. The only other time in life, I told you, that we sit back, we remember, we reminisce, and we really are awake and like, whoa, life is short and important. The only other time is at funerals. But you know what's crazy? And Jesus changed the picture of funerals even? Because in his funeral is the only time where he creates the relationship instead of it being the end of the relationship. Do you guys, can you hear that? It is the only relationship. Every other time you go to a funeral, it's the end of a relationship. You're going and you're like, man, I wish I would have said this to him. I wish I would have done this for him. I wish I would have been a better friend, better brother, better mother, better whatever. Input the relationship because it's over. But when Jesus came and he died, he made the relationship possible. Because he didn't stay in the grave. That's the awesome thing. Anybody, hey man, come on, praise, clap, something. So today, this is where the question comes, and it comes back to this. Is Jesus changing your picture today? See, because when we look at communion, sometimes you might come here, maybe you've been coming to church your whole life, and you feel kind of like an outsider. Can I challenge you today to really look into that relationship? There's none more important. There's no other relationship like it. There's no other relationship that can change your picture the way Jesus can. And so in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 1:18, it says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God." If communion to you is confusing, then maybe you've missed it. And if you've missed it, it's okay. Because here's the thing, like 21 pilots, they do their handshake and they invite everybody up. It's not supposed to be an exclusive club. It is in an invitation for all. So if you're at a place today and you don't know where you're at and you're kind of like, hey, I don't really feel that close. I don't really feel that tight bond that I do with my family with Jesus. When things are going rough, he's not who I turn to. When things are rough, he's not really who I even care about. And I don't really care to mend it with him. If you're at that place today, can I just challenge you? When we're sitting here today, don't participate. It's okay. Let the tray pass. But as it passes, will you do me this favor? Will you think about all the good and awesome and crazy things you have in your life? And whether you realize it or not, know the fact that God is the one who has allowed you all those things. We're going to go into a time of communion here. And before we do, I'm going to read this verse because it's about that crazy, reckless love that he has for us, right? And here's where it is. It says in Romans 8:35, it says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword, all things Jesus endured himself? Shall those things separate us? No." It should be an exclamation there, not a comma. No. "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord." Here's the thought for you guys today. I know some of you guys think that you love your kids way more than anybody else could, and you love people, and we pale in comparison to the love that he has for us. I'm sure you guys are all in the same boat. There's no way you would sacrifice one of your kids to have a relationship with anyone in this room. And that's the difference. We're going to go into a time of communion. As it's passed, if you're a believer, a follower of Christ, if this is a truth for you, if he's changed your picture and you know it, take this time to reminisce and think about all the good he's done for you this week, this month, your life, everything. The small things and the greatest thing. And if you're not at that place yet, it's okay. Let the tray pass. But will you just think about it today, about the idea of what kind of love he has? As we're passing out the elements, you guys know the ordeal if you're part of that secret handshake. But maybe today you've been shaken. Maybe today you're like, oh man, I don't know that kind of relationship, but I want to. If that's you today, before you leave today, make sure to come talk to me. Talk to somebody that you love, an elder, somebody that you trust that's here. Or talk to somebody in your life that you know that you trust. And maybe you're at this place where your relationship's just been fractured, right? Because you haven't done this in a long time. Can I say you can do it right now? That's what communion is for. It's meant to mend that relationship. Because the work has already been done. You are only supposed to say yes. That's your only responsibility. Would you guys, as we're passing this out, we're going to go into a song. It's a new song. It's called The Reckless Love of God. And before we go into it, they're going to pass those out. Sit and hold that cup and that bread for a second and know that that's his body and his blood. His body that was broken, his blood that was poured out for you. Whether you know it or not, it was individually for you. And hold that cup for a minute. We're going to do the song. At any point during this meditation time, during the song, during the thought, you can take that cup when you're ready. And take the bread, take the juice, and do communion with God. If you guys would just pray with me real quick before we hand it out. God, we just thank you for your love. We thank you that you are an awesome God who loves us more than we ever could deserve. You truly are a good Father. Some of us either are missing that relationship or never had a good father. God, I pray that you would just give us a knowledge of what it should be like chasing after you and getting a piece of that. For anybody in here who's in that position. But for the rest of us, God, we know that you are a good father. And hopefully if we've had an example of that, we can just imagine that even as much as our daddies love us and loved us, that it paled in comparison to the love you have for us. It's in your name we pray.